Okay.
So, hello and welcome to Play It by Your Rules. This is Maggie, your host, and today I have another amazing guest, Anis. And on this podcast is all about rewriting the script and play it by our own rules. So instead of me reading your bio, I give you right away the word to introduce yourself. Who are you? What's the legacy you'd like to leave? Or what are maybe the accepted beliefs you'd like to shake up a little bit?
Wow. Okay. Let's start deep immediately. Hello, Maggie. How are you?
I'm good. We can chunk it up in bits. So who are you?
So, who am I? So, my name is Aneace. I live in Singapore. I've been in Singapore for 20 years, almost 20 years. I was in France for 20 years before that. Right now, I'm in Sydney. I'm here. This is the second week I'm in Sydney. And originally from the US, but I left around 45 years ago. So, very much a global nomad. Originally a tech entrepreneur, so I built a payment software company in the south of France, grew it to 30 countries, sold it in 2007 when I was 47 years old. So your listeners who are very good with arithmetic will immediately know how old I am now. And and I thought I was going to be a serial entrepreneur, but I discovered that what I was most proud of was my people. People that used to work for me that went off and became CEOs, CTOs, CFOs of other companies. I discovered I was more proud of that than the technology. And so that sent me at 47 into a midlife crisis. And by the time I was 50, I had emerged as something of an executive coach, leadership facilitator. So that's what I've been doing the last 15 years. That's in a nutshell who I am on a professional standpoint.
That's great. And, it's also personally really inspiring for me because I'm on a crossroad now and I'm 47. So I'm the age you were back then. So I hope I won't fall into a midlife crisis. But I also feel like you're now rewriting this script towards more of a midlife opportunity, right? Based on your own
Yeah,
experience.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a really big one that's developed. It's unfolded for me over the years is I as I was working with senior executives, I was starting to notice a qualitative difference in the types of questions and topics that executives under 40 were interested in versus executives over 40, let's say mid 40s and beyond. And I was noticing that more and more. So a few years ago, I decided to draw a line in the sand and I stopped coaching individuals and teams under 40 so that I could focus entirely on senior executives. And then that really helped me get a lot more clarity on what shifts, what changes. And now I see it as a really beautiful opportunity for growth in those. For me, midlife is the most powerful and most effective leadership development program anybody can go through naturally, organically. So yeah, I think it's lovely where you're at 47. I remember 40 plus plus very fondly.
Yeah, so maybe it's actually a good point because so maybe let's also define what midlife is because you mentioned 40 plus. So
Hmm.
where does it start? Where does it end? Does it end? So what are the frames just for listeners to understand a bit better?
Yeah. So I use kind of a generic, almost a universal description of midlife as mid 40s to mid 60s. Now, some people it might occur a bit earlier, some people a bit later, but that's generally the idea. So you're at the beginning of midlife in that definition from mid 40s. I'm at the end of it coming into something else that I don't know. I don't know what this is coming up next. So I use that definition, mid 40s to mid 60s.
Okay, did you also observe because it's interesting you say you might be up for something else. So I've been looking at that a little bit and also looking back my own path. So I feel like every 10 to 15 years people often change. So your midlife, I mean,
Yeah.
that's 20 years, so it might be even a bit longer. But have you seen that in the people you coach, that there are cycles where people feel ready for something else?
Oh yeah. And different points for different people. Um, I really do like the structure of midlife to define or to frame what you're describing. Because when you think of it, our 20s, we get out of school, we're becoming adults, we're learning how to be an adult, we're learning how to work, we're learning how to be in the world. So our 20s are quite formative from that perspective. Our 30s, we're really pushing hard. We've got a lot of energy, we've got a lot going on, we're beginning to have kids maybe. Um, and it's kind of a wave. You can really see people in that mode. 40s, they are crystallizing everything that they've learned in their 20s and 30s. They're really bringing it up as seniors in organizations. And there's often, when you look at a lot of the literature on leadership, the vast majority of leadership programs and leadership literature is for people in their 30s and 40s. Um, and a lot of them were developed by people in their late 30s, early 40s. So many of the big ones that we know, lots of the big names and books and things, uh, they developed their frameworks in their late 30s. So so there's something in that area of really harvesting what we've been doing in our 20s and 30s, and we harvest in our 40s. There's a general tendency to think of the 50s as kind of the end. We're starting to wind down, getting ready for retirement. So you look at HR programs in a lot of organizations, they look at 50s as um, we need to begin planning next steps for these people so that they can be replaced by others. So how are you grooming your successors? What kind of succession plan do you have in place? That's kind of our 50s. Um, and and from that perspective, yeah, you could see the 10, 15-year thing that you're describing. But I don't look at it as 10, 15 years. I look at it kind of chopped up in those decades.
That's, it brought up because I heard this kind of in your 20s, you explore and you discover. In your 30s, you get clear of what you want to do. And your 40s, you get there. And then I started asking, okay, right. And what after,
And
right?
after? Yeah, yeah.
And
I look
once,
at 50s as the midpoint. If you look at a typical lifetime, knock on wood, but many of us are going to be living to 100. The first person, this is what I've heard many people say, that the first person to reach 150 is already born today and is probably just starting work. So if we're going to live really long lives like that, and if a large number of us are going to be active in our 90s, when you're in your 50s, you're really halfway there. So
mm,
you still have another, you've only maybe one third of your professional life is done. You still have two-thirds of active life ahead of you. So I think our whole system today is kind of messed up because it's designed to begin succession planning in our 50s when there's still so much richness and wisdom and energy that's just brimming at that point. So yeah, big changes coming up, in my opinion.
and I think it's so important for people and also for listeners to realize that because I feel like also many peers I'm talking to, in your late 40s, you feel like, okay, the youngsters, they're coming up, they're much more savvy on technology. So you start kind of questioning yourself. And then you feel like, well, if I now want to start over, whatever it might look like, is it too late? But what you're saying is, no,
Yeah.
you're only halfway. So, we should all totally go for it if we have another idea what we would rather do, right?
Yeah, and there is, in my opinion, again, this is all new stuff. Um, I could very well be wrong, but it really feels like the whole AI revolution that we're living in right now is most beneficial for those in their 40s and 50s and 60s. The younger ones, it's going to become more and more hard for people coming out of college to get experience because the kind of work that they used to do in the past to get experience is now going straight into AI. So it's a lot harder. When you think of people in their 40s, 50s, early 60s, the kind of work that you can do today using AI as a partner, you can take all of the ideas and bring them to life so much easier and so much faster and so much more cheaply than you could in the past. That I really think the AI revolution is the big beneficiaries are people in that range of age, and not so much the younger ones, which is unfortunate, very unfortunate.
Yeah, for the younger ones. That's really, I never thought about it that way. You should write your next book on that. I think that'd be hugely empowering, at least for the older age group. And then who knows? I mean, the younger ones, they'll invent something else. I mean, what I read about that is also that there's still the really human interaction type of professions or things
Yeah,
to do. They will probably even be more valued in the future because you cannot replace
yeah,
everything by AI either.
yeah. One big shift. There's a quote that I love very much by a man called Julio Olala, the Brazilian man who was the founder of ontological coaching. And his quote is, um, knowledge is a love affair with answers, and wisdom is a love affair with questions.
Hmm.
And we've been brought up to really value answers. So if you can give an answer quickly, you have to have it on the top of your head, snap your fingers, there's the answer. That's what we were brought up as being valuable. And now that answers are becoming cheap, the real value is the quality of the questions that we ask. And it's possible that the younger generation is going to be pushed into developing wisdom of questioning much earlier than they needed to in the past, as opposed to their value is knowing all the answers, because that really has no value anymore.
Wow, that's really deep. I like that. It brings also these 21st century skills. I mean, that was before the whole large language models, but the four C's, the critical thinking, creativity, communication, and another one.
Yeah,
So I guess those are even more important than, and then you probably have to put
yeah,
questioning, which is not a C, but still, I mean, that would go into that bucket too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The ability to say I don't know,
Mm.
and to be very comfortable, not only be comfortable with saying I don't know, but actually being thrilled and saying, "Oh, this is so cool. Here's something I don't know. Let's research this. Let's dig into this. This is a very, very big, deep question that can't be answered easily. Wonderful. I love that question." But we're brought up to go, "Oh my, here's a question difficult to answer. Let me pretend to know the answer and hope that we can move on from that." So it's a big shift in how we see our value.
Yeah, and I also think we learn new skills. So I've been playing around a lot with ChatGPT, and I realized if you are not very concise and really, precise with your prompt, you get a lot of non so accurate stuff out of it. So I see that also. I have
Yeah.
a 7-year old and he plays around more like ask ChatGPT to create images. And he's really
Uh-huh.
learning now to describe very clearly what he wants to have, because if he doesn't describe it clearly, he's not getting the result he wants. So it's actually a really effective learning
Yeah.
mechanism that you have to be precise. And that's also useful when you work with humans, because often we are equally
Yeah.
fluffy with humans, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
So I also wanted to dive, because I read your book. I thought it was awesome, Soaring Beyond Midlife, because I'm exploring that whole space now, and particularly this way of looking at it as an opportunity. So you also really looked into the neurological and physical changes that happen in midlife. Could you explain that a
Yep.
bit more? Because I think also in terms of awareness for listeners, it's like the more you can recognize, those changes, it might also help to just chill
Yep.
and say like, look, that's just nature and let's just use it to our advantage.
Exactly. Yeah, so I looked and thank you for your comments on my book. I really appreciate that. And I looked at midlife. not through a general lens of midlife. I'm really looking at it from a professional standpoint as senior executives. Um, and so with that caveat, I've identified what I call three winds of change, which kind of frame the book. These are three major changes or areas of change that we go through at midlife that cause the emergence of what I call six midlife leadership superpowers. And the changes, so the first is physiological. You mentioned that we have physical changes, obviously. Our stamina goes down. There are a variety of things that we're very familiar with that in our bodies that change. We're also becoming aware that we will probably live much longer than our parents, grandparents, great grandparents did. And so we become aware that we need to plan for much longer lives than we needed to plan before. All of that is in the physiological wind of change. Neurological is really fascinating. And these are all new discoveries over the last 20, 30 years. And there are new discoveries all the time in this area. The biggest ones that really strike me for the work that I do is that we know that our prefrontal cortex slows down. So the prefrontal cortex slows down. That means that we forget where we put our car keys, we forget somebody's name, we forget the details in a spreadsheet, which we used to know by heart. And now we're wondering, what is in that cell? I don't remember. That's the prefrontal cortex slowing down. And it does so gradually in our 40s, 50s, it gradually slows down. And we're very aware of this. And if you look at, there are a lot of exercises now on strengthening your prefrontal cortex so that it doesn't slow down as much, like learning another language, learning a musical instrument, dancing, all of these things help to slow down. But the prefrontal cortex will slow down. So that's one development. The fascinating thing to me is that there's a parallel development where the two hemispheres are speaking more to each other, the right and left hemisphere. So there's greater communication between the hemispheres, which means that we're able to connect the dots in ways that we might not have been able to a little bit younger. We start to become more comfortable with paradox and ambiguity. Uh, there are questions. This is one of the first I was noticing when I was coaching people under 40 versus over 40. Under 40, people would ask questions, for example, around work-life balance. And you could very quickly see that they had a binary sense in their mind. Either I have work or I have life. Which one is which? If I turn work up, life comes down. If I turn life up, work goes down. And so the view was kind of like what I call a single dial. When we get older, we start to kind of intuitively know that we can have both.
Hmm.
And so it's like we start to have two dials. I can dial up work and I can dial up life. It's not a single binary dial on the way it's looked at younger. And that's the two hemispheres that are talking more with each other because we're more comfortable with that ambiguity and paradox. The the third area, which is actually the first one that I noticed, is the parental wind of change. Um, and this one I think is very dependent on generations. The first two are not so dependent on generations because they're quite physiological and the way the brain works. The third one, parental, is that in our time, many senior executives tend to have children who are growing up and leaving home. And there are variations. Some of them have younger children, and there are people at different parts of the spectrum. But as a tendency, there tends to be a lot of people, senior executives, C-suite level, their kids are late teens, early 20s, they're growing up, leaving home. And so they're struggling, the executives are struggling with this identity transformation of I was a parent all these years and I'm still a parent, but no longer the same kind of caregiver parent. And what's my value now? My value before was in having all the answers, telling them what to do, and putting a roof over their head. Now that they don't want my answers, they don't want me to tell them what to do. They will want me to put a roof on. What's my value? And it's the same thing they struggle with at work, with empowering their people and letting go and really trusting people to emerge. So I find it fascinating that that's happening at the same time as all the rest.
So that these are the three changes of wind. That's really fascinating. And I'd like to pick up on that one because, this, so today, many of the C-level people in their 40s, 50s, they're baby boomers, right? So now Generation X is coming up, or maybe even millennials. And we talked about that in our pre-chat, because so I'm in that bracket and I have a pretty small child. He's 7. So maybe the Gen X generation, I went traveling in my 20s. I maybe took more time to even get really serious at work. So do you see, or do you think that pattern might change slightly with the new generations that maybe
Yeah.
already come with a different set of values, a different timing?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the way I've described the parental wind of change, I think is really valid for a short period of time with this particular generation that is in senior positions today. It'll change and it'll be a lot. There'll be many, many other options like you. There'll be a lot of people having kids at different ages. There are a growing number of people that I'm seeing that are older and are having kids now. Others don't have kids at all. Others have adopted or become a step parent. So there's a lot more richness today.
And
So
also
that'll
maybe,
change. I'm not sure exactly how.
so because you also mentioned you're at the further window of the midlife and you have already grandchildren. So do you see also the leadership style change again with grandchildren where you still care deeply, but maybe you're a bit more, when it becomes too complicated, you happily hand them back to the parents. So do you think that also influences the leadership style somehow?
I'm sure it does. I'm 65 again, and I'm at kind of at the beginning of this phase. I have a question that I keep open for myself, and I don't want to close it through an answer. I want to really sit with the question for a long time. And the question is, what is it that we create in our 60s and 70s? And I know that we continue creating, and I believe we probably continue creating until the very end. It's kind of in our DNA. It's who we are as human beings. We want to create. So I have this big question. What is it that we create in our 60s and 70s? It's different from our 30s, 40s, 50s. I can feel it already as being different. Um, there's less there's less of a striving, I think, and there's less of a it feels more like doing it for ourselves rather than doing it for others. Whereas even when I was a CEO, it always feels like we're doing things for other people,
Mm.
um, trying to satisfy family. When we're a bit younger, satisfying our parents, meeting their expectations. Then meeting the expectations of our spouses, of our families, then of our shareholders, the clients, our employees. There's a lot of that going on, and then it feels like, and I don't have again, I don't want to have a solid answer to this because I want to sit with the open question, but it feels like in our 60s and 70s, that's toned down. It's still there, but it's not at the forefront in the same way. So for me, it's a discovery of what drove me for a long time was the need to be needed.
Mm.
Even as a CEO, there's a need to be needed. That my value came from being needed, and I had that epiphany around 10 years ago, mid 50s, and then I gradually started moving away from that. It's like, okay, am I doing this because I need to be needed, or am I doing it because I really want to do it? And it became quite a distinctive. There's a distinctive quality to decisions that shift through that.
I really like this. This really connects with the whole idea behind played by your rules, because that's kind of also the idea behind that concept. It's not an egoistic way of played by your rules. It's really to reconnect to what do we actually need and want ourselves. Because as you say, we're so driven by society, by our families, by everything. So we're so used to following somebody's script and somebody's expectations that it's actually really hard to figure out what we want and then to claim that space a bit more. This is, I call it a mindful rebellion. This is not radical, but it's
Yeah,
just saying like, no, maybe I can push my boundaries a bit. Or as you say, now it's really your time to figure out what you want to get out of that phase of your life, right? And it's really a bit more about also the
yeah,
legacy you'd like to leave, right? Or is it actually the
yeah.
question? Is it about the legacy or is it just literally to just enjoy that period and just, profit, like savor each moment?
So I love everything you just shared, and there are several layers there to unpack, several like an onion, several layers to unravel. Um, I think that definitely people can work on that earlier in life, on beginning to notice what is it that I'm doing because I need to do it for other people and it's expectations and all that. And it's fine to have those expectations, but being aware of it exactly the way you described it, I think is beautiful. The only point that I would add is that I think that gets easier over time because we
Mm,
just start to let go of stuff kind of naturally. It's still there, but it doesn't hold us as much. Then on your question of legacy, there's a lot there that I really love. I've come to So there's often work with legacy with senior executives as they're getting ready to wrap up their first career, if you like. And I've come to see legacy much less as what is it that we leave behind, and I'm seeing it much more as a quality of presence.
mm,
So it's legacy as presence. Um, Noticing a moment in time that you know is going to resonate for a long time in the future.
mm,
Um, I can share just now, the reason I'm in Sydney right now is my stepdaughter is at the hospital. She's 20 years old and she was operated on yesterday and recovering very nicely. Um, Her mother, my wife, had a very important trip to Brazil that had been planned a long time. I encouraged her to stay and continue with that. My stepdaughter's father also had business happening in Singapore and wasn't able to be here. And I stepped in, which was a first, because when I was younger, I was always very busy and running around the world and all that. And yesterday, with my stepdaughter's boyfriend, he got the call from the operating room that she was coming out of the operating room. He spoke to her briefly. He's also 20, also very young, and he was shaken. And he said he couldn't understand what she was saying. She was in a lot of pain. And it took me back to uh, 35 years ago in France when my ex-wife, well, my wife at the time was going through an operation, and she called me from the operating room, the same voice and the same pain. And I was watching him. He's pacing the room. He's looking very concerned. And I said, you're feeling helpless, right? He said, yeah, that's what it is. And he wiped back a tear. And I was thinking, that moment is going to stay with him for decades, the way it stayed with me. He's going to be possibly thinking about the helplessness for a long time. I'm going to be thinking about his presence, that he was there for
mm,
my stepdaughter. So it, it just it's like these are moments of legacy where they're timeless. They link to the past. Like for me, it was linking back to 35 years ago, realizing that the same moment is being born right now. and linking decades into the futures. I have a different view of legacy than like what is it that we leave behind after we're gone. I look at it as a, what is it we're creating right now in this moment that has that quality of legacy in the moment.
That's really beautiful. And it's also really philosophical almost. And I think what's also, so I also got into this whole concept of nonviolent communication over the last year or so. And in that whole model, I mean, I don't know if you're aware of the by it was created by Marshall Rosenfeld, and it's really useful. And I started getting into it to communicate with my kid better. But one of the first things you learn is to even notice and state and normalize emotions. So I could imagine just
Yeah,
even telling him, is it you that you feel helpless? And him saying, yes, that's what I feel. I think that is already a magical moment because he probably felt understood in
yeah,
that moment and not alone.
yeah, 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 yeah. A lot of beauty in these
Yeah.
things. That's why whenever I hear legacy, that's where I go to. It's these moments of legacy creation in the moment, not what am I going to leave behind after I'm gone.
And I think that really maybe that concept needs either a new word or really a reframing, because I feel like the current way how we understand legacy is even more in this kind of, again, a pressure of, so what are you now leaving behind? It's still on this
Exactly.
expectation. And this is much more
Yeah.
in the present. So that's beautiful.
Mm.
Great. We also, one other question I had prepared, I was wondering, because there's also much more talking about rewirement rather than retirement. I feel like we already touched on that a
Ah.
little bit. Because I don't know, do you see that emerging also more generally? Because as you say, people grow much older, so they hit like the age when they officially can stop working, but that's really when a lot of things might just start, right?
Yeah. And a lot of governments want to push that age back more and more, and they want to encourage people to continue working because at a macro level, fiscally, it's not really sustainable, obviously. But there's also just the fact that there are people that want to retire and go off and play golf. Um, I don't know many of them. Most of the people I know, even though they're very successful, they want to explore what's next. Well, I have a retreat coming up in Bali early November that I'm running for a small group of people, all in their 50s, early 60s, all of them successful. They could all quit working at any time. And the whole retreat is 5 days of exploring what's next. I think that's a movement that's going to become very big. I have an exercise I use under meditation or some form of mindfulness, whether you like swimming or whatever, is who will I be at 100?
Mm.
And visualizing or just even simply asking the question, who will I be at 100? Even without an answer, already rewires the brain because the brain starts to settle into a new belief that I will be active at 100. And then I start maybe changing my habits so that I can make that more real and I can plan on being of good physical shape and mental shape and everything at 100. And there's the sense of I'm going to want to still be creative or active or something. Um, and yeah, so I think that's a huge movement that's already begun.
That's great. I like that because in coaching, often you ask, what would you regret? Imagine your 86-year-old self. What would you regret or what would you want to look back to? But you're right. Now we have to push up that bar a little bit and let think people a bit
Yeah.
bigger. And also, I really like sports analogies. And you mentioned earlier about also the exercises one can use to train the brain already now. So it's like running a marathon, right? I mean, you won't run a marathon if you don't go running every week X
Yeah.
times, right? So it's similar. If we want to be running a marathon at 100, what do we need to put in
Yeah.
our plan today to just keep the body and the mind going, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So there are a lot of books written on that now. That's become a very popular area. I don't actually explore that so much. My kind of white space is senior executives and a professional life into our 80s, 90s, whatever. So there is a lot that's written on that, and it's worth exploring in detail. The types of activities to keep our to get our physical body up to shape to last a long time, the types of activities for our prefrontal cortex. There's quite a lot of research now that's available on that.
Ah, you got me curious. I'll look that up. So, as your focus is on these senior leaders, there's another analogy I've been exploring a little bit. So, I'll test you on how that resonates with you. So, I've been talking a bit about the analogy of Everest Base Camp. So Mount Everest Base Camp is at 4,000 meters. So
Yeah,
not everybody gets to base camp. And I feel like I
yeah.
reached my own base camp, maybe not sea level, but not so far off either. And then you stand there and then you really have different choices, right? So either you gear up to make the summit, but that means you need an oxygen mask, you need different tools, it'll be really tough, it's really rough up there, all of that which comes to really climb to the sea, like the summit. Or you make work at base camp, like you make base camp more, play it more by your rules, kind of put things in place that you're more comfortable at that level, or you go down and do something else. So I kind of test this analogy
Mm,
now with people because I feel like often at midlife we're at that crossroad where we ask ourselves like how much energy and passion do we still have to really make that climb. I don't know, how does that fall? Does that
yeah,
make sense with like the groups of people you're working with?
yeah, yeah. So I look at it as up to deep into midlife, maybe toward the end of midlife. Um, the early part, that part of our career, up until our 50s, let's say, the the ladder and the sorry, did you hear the motorcycle go past? No, it's okay. Good. So I'm sorry.
No problem at all.
I hope we can cut that
That's
part
life.
out. So there's this analogy of a ladder or climbing, which serves us very, very well during that period in our 20s, 30s, 40s, up until our somewhere in our 50s. And at some point, the climbing analogy, I think, starts to fall apart. And I don't know what analogy replaces it, but when I look at all of the frameworks on leadership development, they're all they're all based on like stages moving up. Um, and they all have some ladder or climbing feel to them. And at some point, it doesn't resonate anymore. And I don't know if it means that the next phase after that is more of a deepening, or maybe it's more of a web, a net, some kind of connection. It's a different thing. It's a completely different thing than simply another ladder. I think the ladder analogy just breaks down at that point.
Hmm.
So
So we
you,
need,
so you reach a base camp, you still have a ladder to go up to the top of Everest. But maybe at some point when you've used the ladders, at some point you go, hey, I don't need this. I don't need the ladder anymore. Um, yeah, it's an interesting thing.
so we
I
need a
don't
different
have
tool. So
the
we go
analogy that replaces it.
So we go sailing instead. We forget about climbing altogether. We go and cruise on the like on the seas and see what that brings. It's really
It
cool.
could, yeah, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's flying or sailing or the analogies that are coming to me are less individual, like flying or sailing or that or li a ladder. They're less individualistic and they're more communal.
Hmm.
We have a deeper desire for connection. We have a deeper um, awareness of presence that kind of emerges naturally. We have a deeper awareness of our mortality.
Hmm.
And we have seen we've lost so many things. We've changed so many times. We've grieved the
Mm.
loss of loved ones. We've grieved the loss of jobs, of homes. We've grieved old identities that have grown um, less relevant and they've kind of dissolved away. So, yeah, it's a different thing, completely different thing.
Yeah. Well, that's probably one of those things where it's also good to have the question out there. So, what is after the letter?
Exactly.
And we don't find an answer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Look, this has been so amazing. I could go on forever. So, we still have the quick burst fire fun bit. Before we move there, is there anything else you feel like you want to share with listeners that we haven't touched on? Anything we might have missed so far?
No, I think we did a lot. We went into some pretty philosophical areas here.
Yes, I love that. In these podcasts, always you start with one idea and then it goes to so many places, and that's what I really love about it. Cool. So we do the quick fire bursts. You know the drill. I have a handful of questions for you that I challenge you to answer with one word or two words, or at least, that's the ambition. Let's see. It's really hard. So let's try. Ready to go?
Let's try it. Let's go.
Fantastic. So, what's one belief you had to drop to live your way?
Uh, need,
Ah, yes, you
needing
said
to be
before.
needed.
Nice. A place that cracked something open in you,
A place that cracked something open in me.
or a moment, maybe.
Oh, Singapore, bizarrely. Singapore was so well 20 years of a transition. It turned out to be a healing place for me, which is whenever I tell that to Singaporeans, they say you're crazy. But Singapore cracked something open for me. I think because there's so many people like me that have mixed backgrounds, multicultural. If you ask me where are you from, I really don't like that question because I know people are going to make all kinds of assumptions with the first thing I say. And there are a lot of people in Singapore that are like me that have mixed backgrounds, parents of mixed races and nationalities and all that. So Singapore has really cracked me open from that perspective.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I can really relate to that because I live in Geneva and Geneva is very multicultural as well. I mean, you have people from everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's really nice. So, one thing you had to unlearn.
One thing, oh, there's so much I had to unlearn. Being a boss.
Hmm. Yeah, can you imagine that? That wasn't easy. Your
That was very
non-negotiable.
hard.
Yeah, letting go, like
Yeah,
um
all the respect and people wanting me to come speak at conferences around the world and yeah, all that. Had to let go of all that.
but they might still want you to come to speak at conferences, no? I mean, you don't have to be a boss to
Yeah,
speak.
no, but when I was CEO and speaking at banking conferences around the world, it was like an obvious thing.
Hmm.
So it's yeah, you let go of that, and then suddenly you're one amongst tens of thousands of coaches around the world. So yeah, that's a big thing to let go of, and it's difficult. And I'm extremely happy that I let go of it, but it was quite painful.
Yeah, another bit to grieve, I guess. That was probably quite a
It's
process.
grief. There's grief involved. Yeah.
There's actually, I mean, you might know it. There's a really good book that talks about also about that by I don't have the name right now by the writer, but it was the like hostage at the table or something. It's about the author used to do hostage negotiations and amongst
Oh,
other bits. Oh, he teaches at IMD. I can find the name. But one of the things he really talks about the change curve and particularly grief and how grief is so important.
yeah.
And we often are not very intentional, conscious about it. But if we don't go through the
Yeah.
grief, we cannot move on.
Yeah.
So you just have
Yeah.
got to stick there for a while and allow it and not get stuck either,
Yeah.
just the right dose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Now it's me not sticking to the one word. So what is your non-negotiable right now?
Non-negotiable right now. Time.
Time for yourself,
I'll just
time.
stick to one word.
Yes. Cool.
Yeah,
I see the
time.
C executive. That's great. And what is the boldest risk that paid off? The boldest risk you took that paid off?
Uh, Probably letting go of the tech CEO identity back when I was in my late 40s. Um, and yeah, letting go of the tech CEO identity.
Right. So one word for your leadership or your life in this chapter.
Emergence.
Hmm. And what ripple do you hope your story to create? It's kind of back to legacy, but we take it.
Emergence.
Yeah, beautiful. That's wonderful. So thanks so much for playing along. I quite like this bit. It always brings up interesting tracks. So just to wrap it up, if there's someone listening who's ready to wander off the beaten track, or he's at a crossroad, or he's maybe he or she's also hitting late 40s, getting into midlife, is there one small step you would encourage them to take to get started or to get more clear about the next chapter?
So the answer to that would generally be extremely personal depending on the situation. So I'll use that as a caveat before giving you a more universal answer. Um, I think the first step is to ask this question, who will I be at 100?
Mm.
Because that relaxes the brain and we don't start looking at here I am now, I'm holding on to it really tight, like what am I going to do next? My runway is finishing up, but I don't have many more years left. I need to really work hard to bring money in so that I can be free to do what I want to do later. If you can relax the brain with the question, who will I be at 100? um, then that can open up all the other things that take you into midlife and beyond.
That's wonderful. I like that. I'll do that myself. I'll make a collage. I'm a visual person. I'll put like pictures on a paper and
A
see.
collage is beautiful. That's great.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Anis. Thanks so much taking the time. I thought it was really deep, inspiring. So thanks so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Maggie. Lovely
Bye.
being here. Thank you. You too.